a new model that you can listen to what's happening without focusing your eyes always on that screen and losing your sight after some time. And there is a lot of other examples. What we put on finance. And basically what we're doing, we want to listen to the heartbeat of propagation. We think that the stock market is basically the stock is the heart of the whole world, especially the top 500 companies. We're listening to their stock price, and we selected 25 random companies to convey their data. The model, you're going to see some example later, you're going to hear some example later on, is like kind of those so abstract paintings. We have a lot of nodes playing together, and it's not easy for us to extrapolate the patterns as of yet, or to listen to the patterns. This one we want to share with you, and it really needs some engagement to concentrate and see what we can get out of that. The conversion mechanism is very simple. We take the whole chart and try to limit it between 0 and 88 multiple, and then play them on a node. And there is some math involved. What's really important is we're mapping the data only on two elements of the musical scale, just the note and the pitch. So basically, for every number on the stock price, we get a note, and then the intensity of that number, the intensity of the jump up and down, is going to be converted into the duration. Now I'm going to leave the floor for Kader to continue with some sentences.
Thanks, Bilal. So, up to this point, we understand that we take stock market data, we convert it into sound. The real challenge was trying to make sense of this. So there are a couple of different approaches that we started off with. One was a harmonic approach, basically taking the data of multiple corporations, putting it together and seeing, is there some kind of a harmony, what level of consonance or dissonance we have among these various corporations. Another approach was to see if we can find some kind of a rhythm. And I will show you how we did these two. But really, through these types of analysis, we wanted to see if there were some patterns that would allow us to look at some synchronicity among different companies as they're moving together. Is there some mirroring feedback? Are there certain cycles that we might be able to identify with our ears that we can't identify with our eyes? So more on harmonic analysis, we wanted to observe synchronicities and cycles by looking at harmonies. In other words, putting multiple data points together. But we also wanted to see if there is a bit of science to the madness, because simply listening to it, and I will play you a couple of files in a minute, simply listening to it could be a little mad. So we wanted to see, can we use musical vocabulary or musical theory to understand the harmonies that are going on here. So the harmonic analysis looks something like this. You've got 5 different data points that are going on over time, 5 companies, 3 years. And we interviewed a jazz musician and we interviewed a classical trained musician to understand which harmonic analysis would work better. And we quickly understood that the classical harmony theory is very complex and we wouldn't be able to really use it. It would add a level of complexity and abstraction that was way too much for this project. So we reverted to the jazz harmony, which is in and of itself complex, but it allows us to understand consonance and dissonance in a lot simpler way. So what we did is we looked at these, we looked at this data, and we coded for 4 levels of dissonance. So 0 was highly dissonant harmonic construction, containing a lot of different notes very close together. And 3 was a consonant chord, which was basically a C major or a C minor. The chords were fairly spread apart. And so we coded for all of these. What turns out is overall we had quite high levels of dissonance across these years. And there wasn't much difference between the years. So year 1, year 3 had a score of 8, which was highly dissonant. Year 2, which I think was the year of the financial crisis, had a score that was somewhat consonant, or more consonant than the other 2, but really not by much. So this harmonic analysis led us to believe it's very difficult to hear the harmony, and it's even more difficult to perceive through the theories that we've used what the harmony might be. So I will play about 30 seconds of the harmonic data This contains 5 companies in the same industry over 3 years. Some companies are doing really well and some are doing really poorly. And there are moments when they do converge a little bit, either on the lower notes or on the higher notes. So we can hear these things, but apart from that, it's really hard to make sense of any patterns that are going on. On to the next analysis that we used here, which was the rhythmic analysis. And so this here might be the example of a piano roll for the conversion of a stock price of one company. And what you might be able to see, although probably not very easily, is that you have very specific instance on the piano roll of these notes when they occur, and they're all very regular. So really there's no rhythm to speak of. The notes are just happening one after the other with the same exact length. So what we wanted to do in order to understand if we can tease out a little bit of a rhythm was, if we can take these notes, you've got 4 notes that happen exactly at the same time, can we create one note? So basically put these 4 notes together, or the 2 notes or the 3 notes together, to allow there to be some kind of a rhythmical expression or music. So here's what came out of that, and this is for just one of the companies. There is a bit of a rhythm. It's a little easier to listen to than the previous one. So in order to aid us in interpreting this data, we realized we were coming to some of our own limitations. So we wanted to speak with other people and see what they thought. So we conducted a focus group, 16 participants. They were all having some kind of musical experience. It was quite diverse. We had people with formal musical education, some people with informal education. Some were trained in classical, others in popular. And we asked them individually to answer some open-ended questions, and then we also asked them to participate in a plenary discussion. At the time of the focus group, we did not disclose what the music represented. We did not tell them how that music was made. We just told them we were going to present some sound files and we were going to ask them to respond to that. What we were gauging in the questions were 3 things. Was there an emotional engagement with the piece? What feelings were associated with listening to these sound files? We also wanted to see what was the level of the aesthetic engagement that they had with this. What did they think of the music? What vocabulary did they use to talk about it? What was missing and what would add in the performance of this music? And finally, we wanted to understand if they engage with it intellectually. Could they anticipate? So much of what music is anticipating and having those anticipations fulfilled or violated in some form. So we wanted to understand, can they anticipate, predict what was coming next? Now I'll give you a few results and quotes from these. I won't go through all of them, but some of the more significant ones. In terms of the emotional engagement, there's a wide range of emotions that were expressed here, and not all of them were negative. Someone said, it made me nostalgic because I wasn't alive in the 1950s, and I wish I had been. It made me think of what it must have been like at an art gallery opening in 1955, the incidental music, Samuel Barber sitting around in a corner. Well, it's a bit picturesque. Someone else said, frustrated. I could sense their interest in finding something. I don't know if they found it, but you can sense the search. Someone else said, I found the tapes really depressing. I don't like jazz music, not one of my favorites. The first was fractured, sort of expressionism, and then describes the other ones. It made me uncomfortable. It was like there was a chaos going on, like in the movie Psycho. In the end, the guy had a split personality. This isn't right. It's not normal human way of doing it. Noticing in this quote, the person is questioning whether there's a human behind these sounds. It felt like someone was fiddling around, not going anywhere, definitely using the entire range, but not getting anywhere. And then someone says, first piece of music had melancholy, then sad and depressed, and fear also. Second was mysterious, mixed dynamics, ensemble music. So the emotional engagement here was important to us because if this can turn out into an application that people would use, we want to know what kind of emotions are engaged here.
You wind it up. You have time.
Sorry.
You need to wind it up.
Okay. We also looked at the aesthetic engagement, and that I won't go through these quotes, but this really gave us a musical vocabulary that explains and helps us interpret this data. And finally, in terms of intellectual engagement, we did see that people with some of the pieces were able to anticipate a little bit of what was coming. But it was only after they had listened to the pieces multiple times. But first listening, it was really impossible for them to get in the frame of mind of what this tradition was coming from, where it was going, what it was about. So once people understood that they were dealing with some abstract material, it became a little easier for them to engage with it. So really, we want to end with questions. Since this is an exploratory study, we're also trying to see where are some avenues where we can move forward with this. Are there data recognition patterns that we're not considering? Is there any way that we can improve or change our methodology? And in the end, how do we make sense out of the sonification process? How useful is it? How much does it add to other aesthetic methodologies out there, maybe visual or other senses that are being used? Thank you.
I think what you come across is what I've understood from a lot of other people who do data mapping is that you have to find the right parameter, the right map to be able to make any sense of it in terms of turning it into an aesthetic process, which is really what you're doing. And I think also the human engagement that you talk about, the people's interpretive, it's impossible for, I find this with students who play with something extremely abstract, something that's intended to be non-narrative, and they always construct a narrative for it. They'll create a protagonist, an antagonist, an ending, a beginning, and you know that the artist's intent was never that. So I think in some way it's inescapable for the human framework to be put onto any kind of data that you give them, whether it's music or not. And so I think what you're going towards, what you sort of arrived at, is counterpoint, which is something that musicians discovered they needed to make sense of musical data or musical structure to make it, like, so Bach could have 5 melodies going at the same time and you'd be able to hear them. So that's what you've arrived at. I just wonder, where's the boundary where you're making aesthetic decisions in terms of your data mapping? Where's the boundary that you might cross over, in which case you're damaging the data, you're being unscientific about it, and you're actually changing it. But I think for it to make sense, if you're using it as a tool for people to make sense of the market, then you have to aestheticize it even more. And I noticed with your MIDI playback, it's very rigid. I mean, all that we heard was that it's very, very mechanical, and I wonder if there's a way to just induce a little bit more nuance. Maybe it's in the data already, where you can have some slight tempo differences or dynamics or things like that actually, maybe there's a dynamic component that you haven't thought of mapping onto it that would make it more musical. You know. So.
Yeah, thank you for the comment. That's good feedback. Because I think a large part of the sonification material is quite difficult to engage with. And yeah.
I think it's a really important piece of research. What's missing for me is that, to me, the Dow Jones Index is not necessarily a true reflection of the corporation. It's a reflection of the market. It's a reflection of outside forces that drive decisions, and especially in today's social media world where everything is accelerated beyond comprehension and beyond real value. So, to me, somehow there has to be a comparison between what actually the sonic rhythms are within the company, however you measure it, versus what's going on in the marketplace, and therefore you can have a measurement tool to consult with corporations as to how to adjust their thing. But the concept to me is really brilliant. So I would take it to a...
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I think the first thing that we picked was the stock price, but there are a lot of other data, for example, absenteeism or accounting data within the firm or human resource data within the firm that would be better reflection of the rhythms of the firm. And I agree also with your point about the indexes or collections versus individual companies. The indexes have a lot more confusion and noise associated with them than individual companies.
We're talking about lemmings versus individual animals. So
Yes.
you have an individual animal being dictated by a lemming mentality. So how do you resolve that? It doesn't work.
I know there's a lot of hands up here, but we have another full presentation, so we'll have 10 minutes at the end and we can ask questions at that time. We haven't done any thinking around where we could take this, but it looks like an interesting idea. We are right now so steeped in the data at an individual firm level and some combinations of industry as well as market level analysis. But what you are talking about could, so it's trades, that's total number of trades that are happening. Is that what you're thinking that would allow us to model the overall market?
I guess modeling what the implications of different financial policies would mean, right? Because I guess I just think something like there's a lot of dialogue about, well, how can we change what's happening, like too much speculation, et cetera, and some people suggest, well, if you put in the Tobin test or something like it, it would shift trading, right? So there's a lot of financial models that look at that, and I'm wondering if there's ways to sonify or whatever you use that.
Yeah.
And to create it so it's more understandable for people.
I think it would be a great application, a great direction to go in. I think our problem right now is that we're not fully confident of the method. We think that there is the previous Paul Schreiber's comment about the way you convert this data makes a huge difference of what you are getting. So we thought that for the first year or two of the project, we want to remain at the level of playing with the data, trying to understand what exactly we have, and then these kind of more sophisticated applications would be the next step.
Although it's very interesting to, right now you study 5 companies in one industry, so would it be interesting to look at other industries? Because the whole point is to see, it's related to sustainability. So maybe if we could compare
Automobiles and computers
or other more
agriculture.
sustainable, how would it sound if it was the most sustainable industry or a company?
Yeah. We did 5 industries this time, but we didn't do it selected on the level of sort of a priori judgment about sustainable levels of fuel. I don't know if there's any industry that is actually can be considered to be sustainable. They're all trying to become sustainable, but they're patently unsustainable, at least in our assumptions. So, yeah, but that's a good idea to do comparison across industries, and we've started some of that.
I'm thinking of ways that you could actually develop more of a diagnostic tool, which could be used within one company or enterprise, but could also be used to compare different kinds of companies and enterprises. So I was thinking that, enlarging on, you started with the stock price, but you could develop sort of a taxonomy, which could be keyed just to a musical scale. And that taxonomy could include cultural markers, which would have to be defined by the company itself in terms of its, mission statement and stated values. And, as sort of a subset, it would be very interesting to see how the whole ESR category of companies define. And obviously, when you develop a taxonomy, some companies would use some values, some wouldn't look at them at all. But then, if you also included, and again, this would need to be generated by the companies, performance markers, you could run comparisons between the performance markers and the sort of corporate culture markers. And maybe you could see whether there would be a dissonance relationship that could be diagnostic.
So between financial performance and, let's say, environmental performance or social performance?
I was thinking of a richer index, but you could start, with discrete markers.
Very interesting.
I want to challenge your assumption at this stage of relatively mature work that your best path is to go into the analysis aspect of what you're doing. I have no doubt that the brain can discover patterns with our ears in a different way than with the eye, etc. So by all means go in that direction. But I think you have a gold mine in trying to imbue patterns that have already been found visually or with statistical finance tools and stuff like that, to imbue them with emotional meaning. So a very different example. I work with the Red Cross. I'm a scientist. We know that when El Nino, the Pacific Ocean gets much warmer, evaporates, it rains like hell in Peru, but it also causes drought in Zimbabwe. So we know a Japanese researcher, a climate researcher, who put ocean temperature to music, just like you did with stuff. It goes dun, 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 dun. Now, if I had for every Red Cross operation with hungry people, with flooded people, a splash, and the ear could notice that when the temperature starts going up, 3 months later there's a Red Cross operation. Then I want the Red Cross to receive donations from people as soon as the temperature starts going up, because we can save more lives ahead of time. I'm sure you can think of financial patterns that are already well understood by the experts, but not by the public or the voters or the members of Congress. And you could use your musicalization approach to things that are just not penetrating the soul and the guts of those who make decisions. If you start with that, I think you will much more rapidly zoom into the aspects of the quantifiable financial universe that can be enhanced, enriched, communicated through sound.
Yeah, in the finance tradition there are what I call event studies that do pre and post event analysis. So we could take some critical events like the 2008 collapse or the 1987 collapse and then do studies and kind of create a sonic equivalent of what you're seeing on the chart. I think that's probably the next few steps. So I'm really glad to get these kind of comments which are anticipating some of the things we've been discussing. It validates our approach. But I also want you to know that the other groups are also open for questions.
Yeah, so if I could add the same question to especially the third group, the compatriota, because I think it would be great to, and maybe you're already doing it and we just didn't hear enough of your presentation, but how to turn that very clever and environmentally friendly labor that is happening in your space, to turn it into something with an artistic component that is designed to reach the people who are not thinking about recycling and stuff like that. So how can we embed what comes in and out, because that's your contribution, right, into grade schools, into waste management companies, into all these things. I can imagine art made with all the zinc out of the CPUs or all the capacitors, and then we just think of how many capacitors are hiding in the wasteland and do more art, like the movie Wasteland. There's so much potential there.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, we're kind of working on that, and it's the very beginning. But yeah, that's already been a good plan.
I have a question for that group too. So it looks like you all are doing more interesting things with waste than a typical electronic engineer does with raw materials. So my question is about what of this technology of disarmament that you have articulated can be brought into an engineering school a priori before these guys started designing stuff that becomes your raw material. Because I think the overall question of e-waste, of course, is tremendous. It's billions and billions, and it's growing faster than anything else. And I'm wondering if some of the things that you all have learned could be actually helpful as to engineering and design faculty.
There's a whole culture of people going out there and hacking into things. And that already connects some other connections about your work. It also connects up with sort of geeky hacker ones that actually do happen to make something else. I mean, it's really nice that like artistic qualities, and then there's combining the artistic works with usually male geeky guys to try and get something happening together.
Yeah. So yeah, that would be great to do that. Yeah, we would like to work with different careers in the university, and that's the next step, but it's like a huge amount of work going on. So we're doing step by step. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Ricardo is saying cut it off. But I just, as an ending comment, we started this session with this idea of multimodal understanding. So I hope we get a view of the span of things that is going on. I can see a lot of connections between these different modes of understanding sustainability challenges. And I encourage you to come down for coffee and continue this conversation. Thank you.